So we talked about the cascade and specificity in the last lecture, and these concepts can absolutely be a bit hard to grasp. So let's now look at an example that I prepared for you and which is actually pretty similar to what we looked at in the last lecture. In order to do that, let's open a CodePen so that I can quickly experiment with some code. Now, in case you're not familiar with CodePen, it's just a very simple web app where we can input HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code and experiment with it, and it will then render the result down here, okay? So if you want to follow this quick example, then just go to CodePen, codepen.io, and it will probably, here, so create a new pen. And then you can just copy the code that I have in my CodePen here. So just pause the video and copy the code if you want, but it's, I think, not really necessary if you don't wanna. You can just watch me explaining stuff here in this CodePen that I have prepared already. So this is, again, similar to the example that we had in the previous slide. So down here we have the don't click button. So we have 4 selectors here that actually select this button and try to give it a different background color. So we simply have the button class selector here, then we have the anchor element selector, we have this huge crazy selector here, and then we have this one here which actually has the hover pseudo class. So let's see what happens. So as we already saw, this one has a pretty low specificity, right? Because it has just one class. And this one here even worse. This is almost like the lowest specificity possible. And so these blue and purple color, there's almost no way that we can have this color here on the button. But there is one way though, right? Remember? Because even if the specificity is really low, we can give these declarations a higher importance. And then the specificity doesn't even matter, because if they're more important, they will be applied. And so for example, if we put an important here and wait till it updates, then here, right, we have the purple color that we specified here. And so now, even with the lowest specificity possible, we have the purple background color simply because we made this declaration more important than all the others. And the same thing would of course work if we put it here. Just to show it to you, of course it turns blue. Now I already mentioned that we shouldn't really use this important unless there's something really weird going on in your code. But usually if you need to use important, then that's a pretty bad sign, and you should probably go back and refactor your code and change some stuff in there. Now what I really wanted to show you though is these 2 selectors down here. So you see that currently this declaration here is the one that applies, because this selector is the one with the highest specificity of these 3. Not counting this one here right now because it's on a hover state. So this is supposed to only turn yellow when we hover the button. Now what actually happens when we now hover the button? Let's try it out. And it doesn't turn yellow, right? Even though we specified here that the button, when it's hovered, should turn yellow. So why is that happening? And it is happening for a very simple reason. Because remember that pseudo classes also count into the specificity. So this one here counts 1 into specificity. Now if we do the math of this selector, which has one ID, such as this one, it has 1 and 2 classes, and this has also 1 and 2 classes, because this one counts as if it was a class, but then this one has 2 elements, and this only has 1. And therefore, this selector here is more specific. So again, it has the same amount of IDs, the same amount of classes, but this one here has 2 more elements, div and a, while this one only has 1. And so no matter if it says hover or whatever it says here, this one is more specific, and therefore it's the one that applies, not this one. No matter if you hover it or not, the specificity is lower, and so it cannot be applied. If we want the background color to be yellow, then we will need a selector which has an even higher specificity. So let's just copy this one here. So hover here, say something else like green, and let's see what happens now. And now it turns green. And that's because now this selector here has a higher specificity than this one, right? Because of course this one here, this part is the same as this, but then we add one pseudo class, and so all of a sudden this one here is more specific, and then it applies. So you see that not only we have to make sure that we have the hover pseudo class in place if you want a hover effect, also the selector should have a higher specificity than the original one. which in this case is this one. This usually isn't a problem, but believe me that it happened to me a couple of times that I was writing some really complex navigation in one of my sites, and all of a sudden the hovers weren't working and nothing was really working as I was expecting. And so I had to learn it the hard way by experimenting a lot and finding out why it didn't work. And so that's why I'm warning you here that you should be careful with your selector specificities. So it's really important that you keep this in mind in case something isn't working the way you expect. All right, and I hope that with this you now really understood how specificity and importance work, so that you can write better code in the future and also to be able to debug your code in case something isn't working properly, because that's also a really important skill when you're writing CSS.